Hi everyone, this is U.S. immigration lawyer Michael Ashoori, and in today's video I want to talk about getting a green card through marriage. Now, as many of you may already know, there are ways for you to apply for a green card based on marriage. The marriage must be with either a U.S. citizen or a U.S. permanent resident, a green card holder. Either of these types of marriages may qualify you to apply for your own green card to become a permanent resident of the United States. Now, there's a lot of things that I want to touch upon on this video, so let's get started. The first thing I want to talk about is the requirements. To get married to get a green card through marriage to a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, the first most important requirement is that the marriage must be a bona fide marriage. A bona fide marriage means that when you got married to the person, you were intending to build a life with that person. This marriage cannot be a marriage just for immigration benefits. It must be a legitimate, real, actual marriage. That's the most important requirement. Another requirement is that your spouse, the U.S. citizen or permanent resident, must act as your financial sponsor. And what this means is that they sign a document that says in the event that you go on any sort of public benefits, for example, welfare or whatever the case may be, the government has the ability to seek reimbursement from the financial sponsor. So your spouse has to act as the financial sponsor for your case. And in order to be eligible to act as your financial sponsor, they must have income at least 125% of the federal poverty guideline. You can contact me directly to find out what that amount is. I'd be happy to tell you. Now, one question that comes up is, what if your sponsor does not make enough money to qualify to be your sponsor? If that's the case, then you can bring a joint sponsor onto the case as well. So you can have another person to act as your sponsor jointly with your spouse. So that's another requirement, the financial sponsorship. In addition to that, another requirement is that you cannot be inadmissible for immigration, meaning that there are certain crimes and other things that can make you ineligible. You cannot fall into any of those categories of inadmissibility. Again, if you have any questions about that, whether you fall into one of those categories, feel free to contact me directly. I'd be happy to guide you through that. Okay, so those are some of the main requirements for getting a green card through marriage. Now, another question that I get asked is kind of what's the documentation? What are the forms that need to be filed? So the forms, there's two forms that get filed with USCIS. Two major forms. One is the form I-130, and this is the immigrant petition. And with the I-130, this is basically the form that you submit along with a lot of evidence to show the actual relationship between you and your spouse. So along with this form, you submit a lot of documentation regarding your relationship, showing that it was a real marriage and everything. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But yeah, so just know that one of the forms that gets filed with USCIS is the form I-130. Now, the other form that you file will depend on, the type of form that you'll file will depend on whether you're inside the United States or whether you're outside of the United States. If you're inside the United States, in a status in the United States, the form that you'll file is the form I-485, which is the adjustment of status form. And this is the form that you file to go from whatever your status you're currently in to permanent resident status. Again, that's the form I-485. And you file that typically when you're already in the United States. If you're not in the United States, then you would file a form DS-260. So that's the form that you would file if you're outside of the United States. Again, in either case, you still file the first form that we talked about, the form I-130, but whether you will file the form I-485 or the DS-260 will depend on whether you're inside the United States or outside of the United States. So those are the two forms that get filed. Now, another question that we get asked is, what kinds of documentation do I submit to show that I'm in a valid, legitimate marriage? So there's a lot of different types of documentation that you can submit to show that you're in a valid marriage. I'm just going to list off some of the documentation that we typically include. So one form of evidence is showing that you have a joint bank account. So we submit bank statements that show that both you and your spouse are on the account. In addition to submitting the bank statement, it's important that the bank account that is the joint account is an account that you guys are regularly using. It should be an account that you're using to pay for your bills. That's what kind of gives it the strength. If you have a bank account together, but neither of you uses the bank account, it's just an inactive bank account, that doesn't really have a lot of strength. But if it's an account that you're both regularly using, and you're using it to pay for your expenses and your bills and so on, that gives it a lot more weight. So a joint bank account is a strong piece of evidence. Other evidence that's strong is bills that you have together. So utility bills, electricity bill, water bill, with both of your names on it. A lease or a mortgage or a deed to property with both of your names on it is also a very strong piece of evidence. In addition to that, photos together. So if you've been traveling together and you have photos together, that's also very strong evidence. Photos of your wedding. You're not required to have a very big ceremony, but if you have photos of your wedding, that's also can be strong evidence. Of course, the marriage license is a required document as well. But those are some very strong forms of evidence to show that you're in a real valid marriage. Now, you don't need to have every single type of evidence that I just mentioned. It's more of a holistic approach, but the more evidence you're able to provide, the stronger your case can be built. So that's the documentation. Finally, another thing that I want to talk about is the interview. So in any sort of a marriage-based green card case, there's an interview that takes place. If you're in the United States, the interview will be with USCIS. If you're outside of the United States, the interview will be with a consular officer at a consulate or embassy abroad. Now, during this interview, the officer is going to ask various questions to determine whether you're in a valid marriage. So they may ask questions about how you met, about your spouse's background, how many siblings they have. They may ask questions about your current living arrangements, and they may inquire further. What did you two have for dinner last night, for example, is a question that can be asked. They want to get a sense of whether this is a real marriage, and they're going to ask questions to be able to determine that. Now, there's a lot more to know about, the interview, the process, and so on and so forth. I just wanted to keep this video pretty brief and pretty straight to the point. But if you guys have any questions whatsoever, I've included a special link down below where you can schedule a free consultation with my office. If you're interested at all, please go ahead, select whatever time works for you and schedule a consultation, and we'd be happy to discuss with you. As always, if you found this video useful, please please subscribe to our channel. We're regularly putting out US immigration related videos. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next video.